Hello and welcome to another TLDR Brexit Explained video. In this one, we're going to be revisiting a topic we covered nearly 2 years ago, whether no deal could actually be good for the UK. Now, we're not just revisiting this topic because the first video did well, it's because no deal really looks more likely than ever, and 21 months on, we feel like we probably know a bit more about what no deal will actually look like. Before we get into it though, I wanted to remind you about our book, Brexit the Colouring Book. You may already know, but this book contains 15 beautifully designed drawings ready for you to colour. Alongside each, you'll find a summary of that moment in Brexit. So it also serves as a timeline of the whole Brexit process that we went through together. On top of that, you'll also get access to an exclusive TLDR video, which runs you through the whole Brexit timeline in video form. There's a link to the store in the description below. So, how could no deal be good for the UK? Well, we're going to separate this video into no deal as a transition state and no deal as an end state. A transition state no deal would see the UK leave the EU without a deal on December 31st. But then, after some chaos, one or both sides would realise that it's not a sustainable state of affairs, and then come back to the negotiating table. Here it's obvious how a transitional state of no deal could be a good thing. It could force both sides into softening their negotiating stances, and we could end up with a more sensible deal, assuming that a sensible deal is a better end state than simply no deal. We're saying this as if it's going to be good for everyone, but a transition state no deal could just be good for one side or other. For example, if no deal was an absolute disaster for the EU, disruption in Calais, reduced UK sales for EU manufacturers and so on, but was somehow fine for the UK, then this could put the UK in a stronger negotiating position for a deal. Equally though, if no deal was an absolute disaster for the UK, for details on this check out the video we made last week on the UK's preparedness for no deal, then the UK would end up in a weaker negotiating position than it is currently. So that's how a transition state no deal could be good for the UK. It could force both sides into concessions, or just the EU into concessions. But obviously, it could be bad for the UK if those roles end up being reversed. But what about an end state no deal, where the UK ends the transition period without a deal, and then that's that? Could this be good for the UK? Well, let's start off with the common tropes of fishing and trade deals. As things stand, the UK is in the EU's common fishery policy, something we've explained in detail in a number of videos, including this comprehensive one, linked down below. In an end state no deal situation, the UK would presumably have left the common fisheries policy, which would mean that the UK would have a monopoly over its own waters. Now this would really hurt some EU fishermen, especially the Dutch, who rely on UK waters. But in reality, it doesn't sound like it'll be that great for UK fishermen either. Currently, UK fishermen get most of their catch from UK waters. In 2015, it was about 85% of UK fishing coming from within UK waters. And they'd be able to catch a lot more outside of the common fisheries policy, if they could increase fleet capacity. So great, British fishermen get more fish and control over their waters. Great news, right? Well, the slight hitch is that 65% of the fish they catch ends up being sold to the EU. So in an end state no deal, British fishing exports would be subject to EU fish tariffs, which would be on average about 8%, and in some cases as high as 25%, which could make it a lot harder to sell to the EU. So Britain would need to find new buyers, and fast, or persuade the domestic market to eat more fish. And this brings us on to another problem. British consumers don't really like British fish. Typically, Brits import lots of tuna, haddock and shrimp, none of which are available in UK waters. And British fishermen export a lot of the herring and mackerel they catch, because it's simply not that popular in the UK. It's also worth noting that shellfish, which accounts for about a third of the UK's fishing exports, are dependent on live exports. So any no deal induced delays at the UK-EU border could end up hurting the industry. The long and short of it is, many hope that UK fishermen will be able to catch more fish in an end state no deal, And if they can sell it, they'll be in the money. But there is that if there. So what about trade deals? Well, in an end state no deal, the UK won't have signed up to any EU legislation, no health or sanitary standards, and no workers' rights legislation, which would make it much easier for them to do trade deals with other countries. Now, it's often mentioned that trade deals don't actually make that much difference to GDP. According to the Department for International Trade, a comprehensive UK-US trade deal would only amount to a 0.2% increase in UK GDP. But just focusing on the economics of it sort of misses the point. Trade deals aren't just economic, they're also political. If the UK has the freedom in an end state no deal to strike trade deals with countries like the US, then they'll be able to forge new networks of political allies. Now, these are both advantages, but the astute viewer will have noticed that the fishing industry only accounts for about 0.1% of GDP, and trade deals won't do much to help GDP either. Given that most analyses, including the government's own, expect end state no deal to knock 5% off GDP, is there an economic argument in favour of an end state no deal? Now, looking at this graph, you'd be forgiven for concluding that an end state no deal would be an economic disaster. But it's worth looking at quite how different these forecasts are. They range from a 20% reduction in GDP over 15 years to a 2% reduction. Now, obviously we haven't delved into the maths behind each and every one of these analyses, but from a quick skim, it seems that the variation is mainly due to two things: the unpredictability of economically atypical trade barriers and assumptions about productivity. By economically atypical trade barriers, we mean basically economists can happily model how a change in tariffs will affect trade. It's happened loads of times before, and there's some basic supply and demand theory that goes along with it. But it's much harder to model out how lorry queues, incorrect paperwork, and untested border technology, all of the stuff that counts in a no deal, will end up affecting trade. Because ultimately, it's more of a question of logistics and even politics, and less to do with economics. And also, it's because this has never really happened before. We've already done a video going into more depths about how ready the UK is on this front, so watch that one if you'd like some more detail. But the synopsis of that would be, while the UK doesn't look at all ready and has missed some of their own deadlines, no one really knows how disruption on the border will pan out in a no deal Brexit. It could be a 5-year-long disaster, or a month of slightly worse than average traffic. So let's talk about the other thing that leads to these variations: productivity. Productivity is basically a measure of economic output per unit of time. If two people both create £100 in value, but person A takes 10 hours to do it, and person B only takes 5 hours, then person B is twice as productive as person A. Now, the UK has had a bit of a productivity problem, which UK economists have termed the productivity puzzle. Productivity is ridiculously important for a country's economic well-being. In the words of Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, productivity isn't everything, but in the long term, it's almost everything. So anyway, a lot of these analyses, including the Treasuries, assume that reductions in UK-EU trade and foreign direct investment into the UK will cause productivity to fall even lower. Now, economists have found correlations between these things: trade, foreign direct investment, and productivity. But the correlations don't hold up so well for developed economies, and it's not clear if the correlation is enough to conclude causation. Now, there are other reasons to think that no deal would hurt UK productivity. The UK's most productive sectors are things like pharmaceuticals and financial services, both of which would likely be hurt in a chaotic no deal thanks to regulatory issues. But there are also reasons to think that no deal might help. To give a couple of examples, access to cheap European labour could be suppressing productivity, as it's discouraging businesses to automate or streamline their practices. And so-called EU red tape might also play a role. Anyway, the point is that while the majority of economists think that no deal will hurt productivity, there is scope for disagreement. If an end state no deal happens to improve UK productivity and border disruption is relatively short term, a no deal could end up being an economic positive for the UK. Alright, so that's how an end state no deal could be good for the UK. More fish, new trade deals, and the possibility of a productivity-induced economic upturn. Again, that's definitely a minority opinion among economists, but it is worth noting. Before we finish this video, just 2 footnotes. Firstly, an end state no deal would not increase sovereignty in any meaningful way. If membership of an international organisation that places legal obligations on its members, like the EU, constitutes a violation of sovereignty, then so does the UN, the World Health Organization, NATO, and any human rights treaties. Maybe Britain would get a little bit more sovereign in that sense, but it's still bound by non-EU international laws and obligations. So it's not like the UK wasn't sovereign before, and after a no deal, it will all of a sudden become completely sovereign. Secondly, no deal could be good for everyone, in that it will finally show us who was right. Was it all Project Fear? Or was it all actually a disaster? We've been arguing about this hypothetical for about 5 years now, so it should be a great intellectual relief for everyone to finally see it happen. That's if COVID disruption doesn't cloud the analysis. What do you think though? Are there serious benefits to a no deal Brexit? Or is this just wishful thinking? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And subscribe to the channel so that we can update you if and when this actually happens. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of the videos, like Evan Trenko, Jade Peak, and John Clapshoe, then be sure to back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.